You're about to hear a story most people are too afraid to tell, a story of love that didn't arrive on time, but arrived exactly when it was needed. When he walked out at 60, he took more than just the marriage. He took the warmth, the touch, the feeling of being wanted. But what no one expected was who would walk in next. He was 25, and he didn't come with promises. He came with presence, and slowly, through laughter, tenderness, and the kind of intimacy that speaks louder than words, he awakened every part of her that had been forgotten. This isn't just a story of second chances. This is a story of a woman who bloomed again through deep love, deep connection, and deep truth. If you've ever believed it was too late for love, you're about to feel otherwise. Welcome to a story that may just awaken something in you. It wasn't the divorce papers that hurt the most. It was the way he left his coffee cup on the kitchen table, just like any other morning, and didn't bother to say goodbye. No slammed doors, no shouting, just silence, a quiet exit after 32 years. The house didn't even feel empty at first. It felt paused, like he might walk back in any second, but days passed, then weeks, and the stillness settled into everything. The drawers, the bed, the wine glasses, all untouched. It's strange how quickly absence becomes a presence, the echo of footsteps that never come back, the creak of the hallway in the middle of the night when no one's moving. It wasn't just that he left. It was that he took something she didn't even realize was still part of her. The nights were the hardest, not because of the quiet, but because of what used to live inside the quiet. The warmth of a body, the occasional leg brushing hers under the covers, the way his arm would sometimes find her waist in his sleep, even after the love had faded from his voice. There was something anchoring about being touched, even if the soul behind the touch had long since drifted away. Now there was nothing, no breath beside her, no accidental nudge, just cold sheets and the weight of a body too still to pretend anymore. The body starts to ache in different ways when it's untouched. Not just muscle, something deeper, something emotional, something primal. The skin misses being known, not just grazed but understood, felt in a way that makes it sing even in stillness. She hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had looked at her like she was more than duty, more than routine, more than background. People think desire dies with age, that it dims politely. It doesn't, it hides. It sleeps under the weight of dishes and errands and anniversaries where the fire is faked for the sake of peace. But when the weight is lifted, when the loneliness is loud enough to wake the body, the ache returns. It howls, quiet and relentless. Some nights, the hands would find their way across the emptiness of the mattress, searching for something that wasn't there. Not him, just warmth, just confirmation that this skin still mattered to someone, that these lips weren't forgotten, that this body wasn't just a vessel of time passing, but a living, breathing thing still capable of wanting and being wanted. The mirror started to speak louder too, not cruel, just honest. The softness around the eyes, the way the collarbone still caught light, the curve of the hips that no longer fit the dresses from a decade ago, but now spoke of softness earned. She wasn't young, but she was still here, still real, still aching to be seen, and yet the world didn't look back. The world sees women like furniture after a certain age, useful, present, silent, sometimes admired, rarely desired. She had accepted that, or thought she had, until the ache made it clear. She hadn't let it go. She had buried it. What he took when he left wasn't just love. It was permission to feel, to crave, to burn. She had given it up quietly over the years, as if trading passion for peace. And now, sitting in the middle of a life half lived, she realized how wrong that bargain had been. The loneliness wasn't just about being alone. It was about being untouched, about living in a body no one reached for, a soul no one whispered to at midnight. She didn't need someone to fix her. She needed someone to notice, to see her, not the way he used to, with obligation, but with wonder. With hunger, with softness that lingered, and in the quiet of that realization, something inside her began to stir. Not desperation, not recklessness, just truth, a knowing that she wasn't finished, that this body, these lips, this soul, they weren't done speaking love. They weren't done being written on by the hands of someone who still saw stars in skin, someone who didn't see age but presence, someone who could unwrap a heart slowly, with reverence, not routine. What hurt most wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the fading of herself, the erasure, the silence, but the body remembers, the soul remembers, and somewhere in all that remembering, a question began to rise. What if the story wasn't over? What if the fire hadn't died, only waited? What if there were hands yet to find her, lips yet to learn her name in whispers, and eyes yet to see her, fully, hungrily, gently, and just like that, the emptiness became a kind of hope. Quiet? Yes, but alive, and that's where everything began to change. It started with the simplest knock, not urgent, not forced, just a knock that didn't expect anything, the kind that arrives in a life already full of silence, but doesn't feel like an intrusion. That day hadn't meant anything. The sky wasn't doing anything special. The air wasn't heavy with promise. It was just another day, one of many that looked exactly the same since the moment everything fell apart. He stood there holding something for the neighbor next door, a delivery mistake. That's all it was supposed to be, a package, a polite thank you, maybe a soft smile, and then the door would close again. But something about the way he looked, Topin, curious, warm, kept the door from shutting. His eyes didn't flinch. That was the first thing. No hesitation, no scanning, no judgment, just presence, real, undistracted presence. It had been so long since someone looked like that, as if what they saw mattered, as if what stood in front of them wasn't faded or worn or too far past some invisible expiration date. His gaze didn't search for flaws. It settled softly, with interest, with calm. He spoke with ease, not charm, not performance, just honesty. Little things, like how quiet the neighborhood felt lately, how the trees smelled stronger this season. He laughed at his own clumsy words, not to impress, just to connect. That laugh warmed something long buried. The second time he came by, it was for a favor. Nothing big, just help with something he didn't quite know how to fix. He brought coffee. That wasn't expected either. It wasn't the coffee that mattered. It was the thought behind it, the subtle message, I see you, I thought of you, and somehow, sitting there with that cup between both hands, the air felt different. Less stale, less closed. It had been so long since a voice filled this space without bringing coldness. So long since the silence was broken by something other than distant television. Time passed in little visits. He never stayed long, but he returned, again and again, with stories about work, about his childhood, about moments in life that didn't seem grand, but held a kind of light only someone still awake to life could see. And she listened, not because she had nothing else to do, but because the sound of his voice stirred something inside that hadn't stirred in years. He never looked at her with pity, that mattered, never spoke down, never treated her like she was fragile or leftover or only useful for advice. He asked questions about the books on her shelf, about the plants on the windowsill, about little memories that had gone untouched, just like everything else in that quiet house. It wasn't romantic, not in the beginning. It was easier than that, lighter, like a breeze through a window that hadn't been opened in years. It made the air shift. It made her chest rise in ways it hadn't since the night he left. She found herself smiling without meaning to, laughing too long at his jokes, looking forward to knocks that weren't planned but always came, and he noticed her, Ely noticed, not just the surface, not just the lines and the softness and the stories she wore on her skin. He noticed how her eyes paused when she remembered something sad, how her voice quieted when she felt unsure. He listened like every word she spoke was a gift he didn't want to miss, and then one day something changed. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. It was smaller than that, fingertips, a brush against her hand as he reached for something on the table. Just skin against skin, barely anything, but it was everything, because in that moment, the years didn't matter. The fears didn't matter, the pain didn't matter. All that existed was warmth and truth and the sudden clarity that she hadn't been touched like that, not just physically, but felt like that, in more years than she dared admit. She didn't pull away, he didn't rush. It wasn't a game, it wasn't seduction. It was something softer, slower, a knowing that passed through the fingertips into a part of her that had gone numb and forgotten how to feel. And suddenly, everything inside her began to thaw. The world didn't explode, but something inside her opened. The dull ache she had carried for so long, of being unseen, untouched, unloved, it began to lift. Not because he promised her anything. He didn't, not with words, but with presence, with patience, with the kind of attention that makes a woman remember she is still a woman. He didn't need to chase her. She didn't need to run. Instead, she bloomed quietly, boldly, as if her skin remembered every whisper it had been waiting for, as if her heart had just been waiting for someone who didn't come with expectations or pressure, but wonder. He undressed her slowly, not her body, but the layers, the silence, the guarded smiles, the cautious eyes. He made her feel safe in her skin again, beautiful in her pauses, wanted in her stillness, and she let him. It wasn't planned. There were no candles, no silk sheets or music humming low in the background, just soft light spilling in from the hallway and two hands resting quietly between them on the couch. The night had started like any other of the many they'd spent together, talking, laughing, sharing things that never felt forced, but something had shifted, not in the air, not in the words, but in the stillness between the sentences. That stillness had begun to speak. It wasn't hunger, not at first. It was permission to be close, to be held without being questioned, to want without apology. There had been so many years spent hiding that need, dressing it up as contentment, folding it away between chores and long silences and the occasional memory of what it used to feel like to be touched with meaning. But this was different. When he reached for her, he didn't ask. His hands moved like they were answering something her body had whispered long before her voice could catch up. He didn't lunge, he didn't pull. He just looked at her, really looked, and in that gaze there was no doubt, no pressure, only invitation. The first kiss wasn't sudden. It was soft, like an exhale held too long. His lips didn't take, they asked. And something inside surrendered, not to him, but to the truth that it was okay to be wanted again. Still, her skin wasn't ready, not because it didn't crave him, but because it had forgotten how to be seen. Time had made it easy to believe that desire belonged to the past, that love, especially the kind that lives in the body, had an expiration date. But as his hands moved gently, slowly, as if learning her shape by memory rather than exploration, everything inside her came awake. He didn't touch like a man trying to conquer. He touched like someone holding something sacred, fingertips trailing like prayers along the lines of her back, mouth grazing her collarbone like it was a secret he was finally allowed to speak. He didn't grope or rush or tear anything away. He peeled back the years with reverence, undressing her not just of clothes, but of the shame she'd quietly carried, shame that said she was too old, too tired. Too late. There was no performance in her, no pretending to be something younger, tighter, louder, and still, he watched her like she was the most alive thing he'd ever seen, like each curve and scar and soft place was music his body had been aching to hear. And the way he listened, truly listened, to her breath, to the rise and fall of her chest, to the yes in her silence and the no in her pauses, it made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't lust, it was memory of what it meant to be seen without being evaluated, of how it felt to be held, not for what she gave or what she meant, but for who she was when nothing was being asked of her. The warmth of his skin against hers was not a fire but a light, one that touched the corners of her that had gone dark. She didn't feel young again. She felt real again. There were no fireworks, just slow breathing. Foreheads resting together, hands learning each other's weight. And when their bodies finally met, it wasn't an act. It was a homecoming, not to each other, but to themselves. His every movement said, "You are not forgotten." Her every sigh said, "I am still here." No part of her shrank. No part of him demanded. They moved like dancers who'd never rehearsed but somehow knew the rhythm by heart. He wasn't performing. He was present, and that presence, unwavering, patient, tender, was the most intimate thing she'd ever known. There had been nights before, with others, with routine, with expectation, but this night, this one unwrapped her gently, layer by layer, until all that was left was truth. She didn't need to impress. She didn't need to guide. She just had to let go. Let him hold what had been guarded for too long. Let her body say what her mouth had been afraid to speak. That night wasn't about sex. It was about return. To warmth, to breathe, to the knowing that even now, even here in this older skin and this quiet house, there could be fire, not wild, but sacred. When it was over, nothing was finished, nothing was broken. Nothing felt used or emptied, just full, still, whole in a way that silence never could be, and the tears that slipped down afterward weren't about sadness. They were about recognition of what had been lost, of what had been found again, of what was still possible. Somewhere in the dark, his arm folded around her, not tightly, just enough, and for the first time in years, she didn't flinch when someone stayed. It never felt like a mistake, not even once, not in the moments when his lips traced the curve of her shoulder in the quiet glow of morning, not when his breath steadied her own beneath the weight of something that had no name but felt ancient. It never felt wrong. It felt like remembering. There had been years spent shrinking, years where love was a calendar, not a kiss, where bodies passed each other in kitchens without touch, where birthdays were marked by obligation and the sound of chewing across a table. There were seasons of being the good wife, the faithful woman, the quiet strength behind someone else's story, until the pages started turning on their own, and suddenly she was alone in a house filled with echoes. He didn't knock them down with grand gestures. He didn't try to fill the silence with promises he couldn't keep. What he brought wasn't a fantasy. It was presence, real, attentive, fierce in its simplicity. He didn't save her. He saw her. Every time he looked at her, really looked, something inside loosened. The woman she had buried under years of duty and disappointment began to stir, slowly, cautiously, but deeply. She wasn't waiting for a prince. She wasn't chasing a spark. What she craved was to feel alive, not needed, not tolerated, but wanted, fully, honestly. The nights with him didn't feel like borrowed time. They felt earned, sacred. Each touch carried intention, not urgency. His hands didn't roam. They worshipped, as if they'd found something rare, something worth learning, and he learned her. Not just the dips and curves, but the pauses. The places where she had folded herself for years. The soft spots made hard by silence. The edges dulled by neglect. He kissed those places like they mattered. It wasn't about being young again. She didn't want youth. She wanted truth, and in his eyes there was no shame, no shoulds, no apology for the stretch marks or the softness or the sighs that came from deeper than skin. His touch didn't ask her to perform. It invited her to feel, to respond, to bloom. There was a night, still etched in her bones, when the rain tapped gently against the windows and he reached for her as if he had nothing to prove, only everything to give. They didn't speak, didn't need to. His fingers traced the outline of her hip like he was reading scripture, slow, reverent, and as his mouth found hers, there was no hunger, only gratitude, as if her kiss answered something he'd long been searching for. That night didn't end in climax. It ended in stillness, in limbs tangled beneath linen, in hearts beating without fear. It ended in breath, in warmth, in the kind of silence that comes only when two people know they've just stepped into something real. She didn't wake up feeling owned. She woke up feeling returned to herself. There was passion, yes, but it wasn't wild. It was sacred. Every moan was a memory reclaimed. Every gasp a note in a song she thought her body had forgotten how to sing. And in his arms, she didn't feel like a second chance. She felt like the very beginning. This wasn't a fling. It wasn't a rush to feel something temporary. It was a resurrection, a slow, steady rising. The reawakening of fire she thought had long since turned to ash. His love wasn't casual. It was crafted. With every night they spent together, he didn't just hold her. He healed her. He showed her that softness is not weakness. That vulnerability, when met with care, becomes strength. And that pleasure, true pleasure, isn't about performance. It's about presence. It's about being met where you are, exactly as you are, and being told without words you are enough. And every time his hand found hers in the dark, it wasn't a grasp, it was a grounding, a reminder that her body was not a shell to be discarded or endured. It was a map of every love, every loss, every lesson, and he traced it like he wanted to understand each line. He was younger, yes, but he loved like someone who had learned from lifetimes. He didn't chase excitement, he nurtured depth. He didn't rush toward the finish, he lingered in the unfolding, and in that unfolding, she found pieces of herself long thought buried. Parts that no longer feared the mirror, parts that remembered how to want, how to give, how to feel. No, this was never just about passion. It was about presence. It was about permission. And it was about the kind of love that doesn't come in shouting or firestorms, but in the quiet, slow return to the truth of one's own body, one's own worth, one's own voice. He didn't come to rescue her. He came to remind her, and now, no matter what comes next, she will never forget how it felt to finally come home to herself. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that love doesn't follow rules and desire has no age, then don't let this be the last story you feel with us. Like this video, share it with someone who still believes in deep love, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart, stir the soul, and remind us that it's never too late to be wanted. Until next time, stay open, stay real, and stay ready for love.